Over the last few weeks on the channel, we've been talking a lot about free agency, and the majority of that talk has been surrounding the top guys who are expected to hit the open market on July 1st, guys like Mitch Marner, Sam Bennett, Nick Ehlers, and Brad Marchand. So today I wanted to change things up and do something a little bit different and go over some of the more under-the-radar free agents that I don't think are going to end up signing for a whole lot, who I think could turn out to be steals for whichever team ends up signing them. As always, I want to know what you guys are thinking, so if there's any other under-the-radar free agents that I don't mention in this video that you think could turn out to be steals, be sure to let me know who those players are and why down below in the comments. And with that all being said, let's go ahead and start off the video with the first player on my list. We have Robbie Fabbri, who spent this past season as a member of the Anaheim Ducks. He didn't have a great year as he missed a large chunk of the season due to injury, and in the games he did play, he finished with just 8 goals in 44 games and a shooting percentage of just 12.3, which is one of the lower shooting percentages he's ever finished a season with in his career, as Fabbri is somebody who throughout his career has notoriously been a very solid finisher. Prior to this past season with the Anaheim Ducks, he had 5 consecutive seasons with the Red Wings scoring above a 20-goal pace. Now, the reason I say scoring above a 20-goal pace and not that he actually reached the 20-goal mark is because Robbie Fabbri has actually never had a 20-goal season in his entire career. And the reason for that is because he's somebody who has always struggled to stay healthy. The most games Robbie Fabbri has ever played in a single season is 72, and that was all the way back in his rookie season with the St. Louis Blues in the 2015-16 season. So considering the fact that Fabbri is coming off of yet another injury-riddled season and his goal-scoring production was down from years past, I would be surprised if there's a team out there willing to give him anything more than a cheap one-year deal, which could end up being a steal if he's able to stay healthy. Now, that is a pretty big if, but he is somebody who throughout his career, when he's been on the ice, he has consistently been a very solid finisher, and I definitely think he can still provide teams with good value as a middle six scoring threat and somebody that you can play in the second power play unit. Moving on now to the one and only goaltender on my list. I may catch some heat for this one, but I have Alexander Gorgv. I absolutely refuse to believe that he is actually as bad as he has been over the last few seasons, especially this season. This is a guy who's only 2 years removed from a 40-win season, a season in which he finished with a .919 save percentage and finished 7th in Vezina Trophy voting. Now, I'm definitely not going to sit here and say that I think Alexander Gorgv is ever going to get back to that level, but I do feel like there has to be some kind of happy medium in between that level and the level that we've seen him play at over the last few seasons. And maybe that happy medium is something similar to the level we saw Gorgv perform at as a member of the New York Rangers, where for the most part, he was a pretty solid 1B option for them in net behind Igor Shesterkin. So seeing as how weak this year's free agency class is when it comes to goaltenders, I do think that somebody like Gorgv is still worth taking a chance on, not for teams that are looking for a starting goaltender who can start upwards of 60 games in a season. We saw Gorgv in that role with Colorado, and he was good for one season, but I think that workload quickly got to him and wore him down. I'm more thinking along the lines of teams that already have an established starter who could be looking for a cheap backup option this offseason, a situation where Gorgv isn't going to be asked to do too much. That is definitely the kind of role that I think would be best for Gorgv at this point as he looks to turn his career around. Moving on now to the next player on my list, we have Jonathan Toews, who is looking to make a comeback to the NHL next season after a 2-year hiatus, which isn't going to be easy to do at his age. There's a difference between being in shape and being in game shape, and at the end of the day, this is a guy who hasn't played an NHL game in 2 years. So I think anybody expecting Jonathan Toews to come back and be a legit top 6 center are setting their expectations way too high. I mean, we already started to see a pretty significant decline in Jonathan Toews' performance in the few seasons he played before going away for 2 years, albeit he was playing on some pretty brutal Chicago Blackhawks teams those final few years. Now, with that all being said, I definitely think there is still a pretty good chance Jonathan Toews can come back and be a very effective player, just in a much more limited role than the role he's played throughout his career. He's always been a very smart player, great in the face-off circle, and throughout the majority of his career, he's been great defensively, although the defensive game definitely fell off in the last few years we've seen him play. But again, those years were on some pretty brutal Chicago Blackhawks teams, and I think it's probably a safe bet to assume Jonathan Toews started to maybe cheat a little bit defensively and focus more on the offensive side of the game because those Blackhawks teams really struggled to score, similar to what we're seeing Crosby do now with the Penguins. But if he can get back to being a solid defensive player and he's still great in the face-off dot, then I could see him being a really solid bottom 6 shutdown centerman for a contending team. And even if he's just able to be that and there isn't a whole lot there offensively anymore, I still think he could turn out to be a pretty big steal for whichever team ends up signing him, because you gotta think, given his age and the fact that he hasn't played in 2 years, wherever he ends up signing, it's going to be on a cheap 1-year deal. Moving on now to the next player on my list, we have Dante Fabbro, who is coming off of a fantastic season, definitely the best of his career. What a waiver claim that turned out to be for the Blue Jackets. Now, yes, he played the majority of this season on a pairing with Zach Werenski, who was one of the best defensemen in the entire league this season, which definitely had a positive impact on his numbers. But even throughout his time in Nashville, Fabbro for the most part was always pretty solid defensively, albeit in a much more limited role than the role he played this season for the Blue Jackets, where he was getting top pairing minutes. Now, I usually say right shot defensemen tend to get way overpaid in free agency, but because of the fact that Dante Fabbro isn't all that far removed from being somebody who was placed on waivers, and although he was really good this season in a top pairing role, it was just one season and he was playing with Zach Werenski. I don't think he's going to get some huge contract. I do think he's probably going to get the biggest contract out of any of the players that we're going to talk about in this video. If I had to make a prediction, I'm going to guess a 3 or 4 year deal in the range of $4.5 to $5.5 million per season. And even if he doesn't end up being the top pairing guy that he was this past season for the Blue Jackets on a consistent basis, and he's more of a second pairing guy, I still think a deal like that would age very well for a 26-year-old right shot defenseman who just now seems to be hitting his peak, especially with the cap going up. Next up on my list of under the radar free agents that I think could turn out to be steals, I have Andrei Kuzmenko. When it comes to teams who are going to be looking for a top 6 winger this offseason, they always tend to get linked to guys like Mitch Marner, Nick Ehlers, or even Brock Besser, but there's obviously going to be a lot of teams that miss out on those guys, and I think somebody like Andrei Kuzmenko would be a really good backup option for those teams. His season was kind of all over the place as he ended up playing for 3 different teams. He was ice cold for the majority of the first half of the season with the Calgary Flames. He would then be traded to the Philadelphia Flyers as part of the Joel Farabee and Morgan Frost deal. The Flyers would then flip Andrei Kuzmenko to the Kings at the trade deadline, and in LA is where things really started to click for Andrei Kuzmenko this season. He was a really good fit for the Kings in their top 6 and on that 5-forward power play unit. He started to look a lot more like the Andrei Kuzmenko who put up 74 points as a rookie for the Vancouver Canucks just a few years ago. He's not the kind of player whose skill set translates well in a bottom 6 role. This is a guy who thrives in the top 6, playing with other talented forwards. When you look at the numbers throughout Andrei Kuzmenko's career, when he averages over 16 minutes of ice time per game, he produces really well. Even in the short stint he played with the Philadelphia Flyers, he had 5 points in 7 games. Because of the fact that Kuzmenko has been pretty inconsistent and has bounced around the league a little bit over the last few seasons, I don't think he's going to get some huge contract in free agency. In fact, I feel like it's almost a given that his next AAV comes in at a lower number than his previous AAV of $5.5 million, and I think whichever team ends up signing him could end up getting a steal if they utilize him correctly. I honestly feel like Andrei Kuzmenko would be a really good fit in the Maple Leafs top 6, especially if Mitch Marner leaves. Moving on now to the next player on my list, the only guy that we're going to talk about in this video who is actually still playing right now, Jeff Skinner of the Edmonton Oilers. When Jeff Skinner signed a 1-year, $3 million deal with the Oilers last offseason, I thought it was one of the best value signings of the entire summer. This is a guy who, heading into this season, had scored 30-plus goals in 2 out of his previous 3 seasons, including putting up a career-high 82 points in 79 games in the 2022-23 season. And going to the Oilers, I think a lot of us expected Jeff Skinner to play the majority of this season on a line with Leon Draisaitl or Connor McDavid, but that's just not how things ended up working out, as Jeff Skinner never really stuck in the Edmonton Oilers top 6, and he finished the season averaging a career low in ice time by far and has been a healthy scratch more often than not throughout the Edmonton Oilers playoff run. So even though Jeff Skinner signing with the Oilers didn't really work out the way a lot of us were expecting it to, he still managed to score 16 goals in 72 games during the regular season, despite the fact that he was getting 4th line minutes for the most part. He actually finished the season ranking 5th on the Oilers in goals per 60 minutes, only behind Draisaitl, Perry, Hyman, and McDavid. He's a talented offensive player with great finishing ability. His playstyle really just didn't fit in all that well with the Edmonton Oilers. Considering the kind of season that he had, I'd be surprised if there's going to be a team in free agency willing to give him anything more than what the Oilers gave him last summer. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if we see him sign another 1-year deal somewhere, but if it's for even less than $3 million. And if that's what ends up happening, but this time around he's able to stick in the top 6 of whatever team ends up signing him, then maybe this time he'll turn out to be a steal of a signing, similar to how a lot of us thought he would be for the Oilers. And now finally, finishing up the video with the last player on my list, we have Pius Suter, who I think is probably the most underrated center set to hit the open market on July 1st. He's coming off of a fantastic season with the Canucks, setting new career highs in goals with 25, points with 46, and ice time per game. He was a legit top 6 center for Vancouver this season. And offensive side, Pius Suter was legitimately one of the better defensive centermen in the entire NHL this season. He's an elite penalty killer, all around just a very versatile player who you can really slot in anywheres in the lineup. When it comes to the centers in this year's free agency class, there's obviously going to be a lot more focus on guys like John Tavares and Sam Bennett, even Mikael Granlund, but I really think whichever team ends up signing Pius Suter is going to be very happy with their signing, even if it is in the range of $4 or $5 million per season on a 3 or 4 year deal, similar to what I said about Dante Fabbro. With the cap on the rise, that could turn out to be an absolute steal for somebody in Pius Suter, who I think would be a very good number 3 center on almost any team in the league. So that is going to wrap up today's video, going over my list of some under the radar free agents that I don't think are going to cost a whole lot, who I think could end up being big steals for whichever teams end up signing them. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I always want to know your guys' thoughts, so if there's any players that didn't make my list that would make yours, be sure to let me know who they are and why down below in the comments. And if you made it all this way to the end of the video and you ended up enjoying yourself, please remember to leave a like. It's the best way to let me know that you enjoyed, and it does help out the videos a ton. And most importantly, if this was your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this all year round, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I will talk to you all again soon.